everybody, welcome back. Let's talk about the external genitalia of the female now. So the female has different structures than the male, in that female has a mons pubis, which is that region of the pubic region that contains the majority of pubic hair. The hair actually runs down over the labia majora. So this outer region here is known as the labia majora. Up here we have the clitoris, which is the erectile tissue that is analogous to, or I shouldn't say analogous, homologous to the male penis. You have the vaginal opening here. And then we have vestibular glands, which release a mucus for intercourse. And then here's that urethral orifice, which is where urine is released from the body. And the anus down here. Oh, sorry. Okay. All right. The labia majora covers is the outer region of the vagina. And then we have the labia minora, which is a delicate hair-free region, okay, inside. The majora would be like the scrotal sac, or would be homologous to that scrotal sac. The vestibule, or the which is enclosed by the labia majora, this region, contains the external opening of the vagina as well as the urethra. And then we have vestibular glands, which secrete lubricant or mucus during intercourse, which I talked about. The clitoris is the erectile tissue of females. It has a hooded prepuce, just like the males have a prepuce or foreskin that is typically cut off at about 1 day old. The clitoris is also sensitive erectile tissue, and it swells up with blood during excitement. So females have all the eggs they're ever going to have before they are born. They produce them. So we produce over 1 million eggs. By the time we hit puberty, we have less than a few 100,000 eggs. So the majority of the eggs actually degenerate during infancy and adolescence until we hit puberty. So every month we stimulate a couple dozen eggs to start or to get active. And only, in general, only one of those eggs is going to mature into that secondary oocyte, which will then be released. The other eggs that are activated, they secrete chemicals and then they degenerate. So by the time we hit somewhere in our 50s, women will then enter menopause, and at the end of menopause, they will no longer produce any eggs or release any eggs. So where males produce sperm from puberty until they die, females have all of their eggs. They just activate those eggs from puberty until they hit menopause, and then they are infertile after that. So the process of female meiosis is called oogenesis, and it starts before birth. So oogonia undergo mitosis to produce primary oocytes that are surrounded by cells that form what we call the primary follicle in the ovaries. The primary oocytes then lie inactive or dormant. They stop in meiosis 1 during prophase 1, and they just sit there waiting for follicle stimulating hormone at puberty to stimulate the maturation of the eggs. And then every month, like I said, a couple dozen, roughly, between, so it could be anywhere between 1 to 2 dozen eggs get activated. So meiosis starts before, like I said, before we're even born. But the first meiotic division produces a large oocyte, secondary oocyte, and a small polar body. So this occurs every month from puberty until we run out of eggs. So we have arrested in meiosis 1 at prophase 1, and then during during your from puberty on, every month we stimulate one single follicle to undergo the rest of meiosis 1. And when it does, it produces a secondary oocyte. And then instead of the equal division where you have two haploid cells like you do with sperm, in the female, we have one haploid cell called a secondary oocyte, and then we have a smaller structure that just only contains the extra chromosomes. And so that's called a polar body. It cannot survive. It's just chromosomes. So it's going to degenerate. So the vesicular follicle contains that secondary oocyte. And that secondary oocyte, again, is going to be arrested at the metaphyseal plate. It's not going to go through the rest of meiosis 2 unless fertilization occurs. So if you have a normal ovarian cycle, at about day 14, ovulation occurs, and that secondary oocyte is going to be released by the rupture of that vesicular follicle. And so here you see that oocyte being released. Surrounding the oocyte are tiny little protective cells called the corona radiata. And those cells basically are going to protect the oocyte so that nothing can damage the information inside. So meiosis only finishes if sperm penetrate the egg. So if you have fertilization, that stimulates the second meiotic division to finish. If it does, then you produce a oocyte and a second polar body. So the ovum, or the oocyte or ovum that is formed, is going to contain 23 chromosomes, as well as all of the organelles and nutrients needed for the zygote to survive. If the secondary oocyte does not have fertilization, then it's not going to complete meiosis, and you're going to end up having a menstrual cycle. So in males, meiosis produces 4 functional sperm, but in females, we produce only 1 functional ovum. Sperm are tiny, motile, and basically they're just a bag of chromosomes that moves towards the egg. The egg is large, it's non-motile, it has all the nutrients needed to nourish the embryo until implantation. and occurs. So here we have the meiosis, or so here we have that first meiotic stem cell, the oogonium, that undergoes mitosis, producing a primary oocyte. So the primary oocyte is going to be a diploid cell that will eventually divide into a haploid cell during meiosis 1 and a polar body. So here we have that primary oocyte arrested in prophase 1, and it's not going to move anywhere until we hit puberty. Once we hit puberty, that primary oocyte is going to undergo the rest of meiosis 1, and it's going to then produce a secondary oocyte, which will then be arrested in the metaphyseal plate until fertilization occurs. If that doesn't occur, then the egg will just die. But if it does occur, then the egg will undergo another meiotic division and produce another polar body. And so then you have this second, female egg. I won't say female egg. I mean, they're all female eggs, I guess, but this egg from a female, and then the sperm from a male, and the sperm, because it fertilized, is now going to be a zygote. So this would be a zygote if sperm fertilized it. If sperm did not fertilize it, then you would have this egg that was arrested at the metaphyseal plate that just degenerates. So what stimulates the follicles and secondary sexual characteristics? So we have follicle stimulating hormone that stimulates the production of those follicles and activates the excitement or the waking up of the follicles at puberty. And then we have luteinizing hormone that stimulates the production of estrogens. So estrogens are going to produce or cause those secondary sexual characteristics of females, including the development of breasts, the axillary and pubic hair, increased fat in the hips, so widening of the hips and breasts, and enlarging and the enlargement of breasts, and the menstrual cycle. Progesterone, which is produced by the corpus luteum, is going to be produced as long as we have luteinizing hormone. The progesterone doesn't stimulate secondary sexual characteristics, but it does help to maintain pregnancy, and it helps to get the breasts ready for lactation. So females undergo 2 different cycles. We have a uterine and an ovarian cycle. The uterine cycle is the changes within the uterus, and in general we assume a 28-day cycle because that's the norm. So the uterine cycle is regulated by estrogen and progesterone levels, which are regulated by follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone levels. The ovaries then are regulated by follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone. And on day 14 of the ovarian cycle, we release the egg. And that is going to also stimulate a surge in luteinizing hormone, and also stimulates the production of progesterone. So the menstrual cycle, or the uterine cycle has 4 stages. We have the menstrual phase, and then we have the proliferative phase, and then the secretory phase. The menstrual phase is the one that most people know about. It's that 5-day period where you bleed. And then proliferative phase is where you start rebuilding that uterine wall. And the secretory phase is where it thickens. So days 1 through 5 are the menstrual phase, where you are getting rid of the endometrium layer from the last uterine cycle. At this point, the ovarian hormones are going to be low because you've stopped producing, the corpus luteum stops producing its progesterone. And so you have very little estrogen or estrogen or progesterone. At day 6 through 14, this is the proliferative phase. Now we're increasing the amount of estrogen in our system. We're activating new eggs, so the endometrium is starting to thicken. Estrogen levels rise. Estrogen has a unique effect on the uterus. It allows progesterone to do its job. So progesterone is what maintains pregnancies. And estrogen basically gets the uterus ready for the progesterone. On day 14, ovulation is going to occur. So on day 15, progesterone levels rise. And this is because now we have that corpus luteum secreting progesterone. So this is getting that uterine lining ready for implantation. So every month, the uterus is preparing for a pregnancy. And every month that we don't get pregnant, that preparation has to be released in our menstrual cycle. So if fertilization occurs, the zygote and then the embryo produce a hormone that stimulates the corpus luteum to continue producing the progesterone. If fertilization does not occur, the corpus luteum is going to degenerate, which means we're going to decrease the amount of progesterone levels. And this is going to cause the corpus luteum, or this is going to cause, not the corpus luteum, the endometrial lining to eventually start sloughing off. And so here you can see days 1 through 5, 6 through 14, and then 15 through 28. So days 1 through 5, we have low levels, and so this isn't showing estrogen or progesterone, but I've been talking about them, so I'm going to talk about those first. We have low levels of progesterone and low levels of estrogen and no progesterone. Then day 6, we start increasing the amount of estrogen. Day 14, when ovulation occurs, now we're going to increase the amount of estrogen or progesterone in our system. At the same time, in the ovaries, we have increase in luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormone, which stimulates those follicles to become active. Luteinizing hormone stimulates an increase in estrogen. So when we have a surge in luteinizing hormone, we have an increase in estrogen that stimulates ovulation. Luteinizing hormone starts to fall off, follicle stimulating hormone starts to fall off, and now we have a high level of progesterone. And again, if fertilization doesn't occur, then luteinizing hormone falls off to like very low levels, and the corpus luteum will degenerate, and progesterone levels will fall off, and that will cause the menstruation to occur. And so here's that ovarian cycle. So I talked about both over there, but here's the ovarian cycle. In the beginning, we start with the primary follicles. One primary follicle is going to be nourished and grow into a secondary follicle, which is going to eventually, so the secondary follicle has went through all of meiosis 1 and is arrested at that metaphyseal plate in meiosis 2. And now we have that vesicular or Graafian follicle, which will eventually ovulate on day 14. And then the vesicular follicle, that ruptured follicle, becomes that corpus luteum that secretes the progesterone. The amount of progesterone that is released is going to keep that uterine lining thick, but as the corpus luteum degenerates, it lowers in the amount of progesterone unless fertilization occurs. And so here you can see the estrogen levels and progesterone levels. And here you can see the actual endometrial lining and what's happening. So the menstrual cycle, we decrease the amount of endometrium, and then we have to start in the proliferative phase preparing again. So we're increasing the thickness of the endometrial lining. We're adding blood vessels to the endometrial lining, making sure that it's nice and nourishing to the growing embryo if it occurs. But if it doesn't, we're going to slough off that endometrium as well. So at this point, this is a long video. I apologize for that. We're going to look at, or you should be able to answer, what are the external genitalia of the female? What are the eggs? When are eggs produced in females? When are eggs released? When does oogenesis stop? What hormone stimulates oogenesis and the ovarian cycle? At the end of meiosis 2 in females, how many eggs are produced? What are polar bodies? What occurs during the uterine cycle? And what hormones stimulate the uterine cycle? So I'm going to stop this video because it is 22 minutes, and we'll get into the mammary glands in the next video. Bye.